So now that we have the connection established, we've set up our connection, we can connect to it when we want to connect to our database. We want to ask it a few questions, and that's where the build our query section comes in. So what we're going to do is we're going to build up our question. Now I can do that inside my PHP admin. I can view all of my database information, and I'm going to start asking this database questions. And I do it by going to the search function, just up here. Click on search. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I just go back for a second, I'm going to ask it to return all the records. Yeah, so that's a record, this is a record, a team record. Return all the records for the teams that played in the Central Division. So it will return this record, for example, but it won't return this one. Yeah, because that one's in the Eastern Division, this one's in the Central Division, and I want all of the records in the Central Division. So I go up to search, and I come down to div ID, the division ID, and where it equals C, I want it to return, and then click go, and it returns all of those records for me. Nice and easy. Now the query, the question that I asked, it actually creates the code for it, the MySQL code for it, up here. So I can select and copy that code, and I use it in my PHP file. So what I want to do is I want to ignore the limit, because I don't want it to limit the records that it returns. I want it to return all the records it has. So I ignore that limit, and I just copy, and I come back to Dreamweaver, and I can paste that in there. Paste that in there, delete, bring that onto one line. Now there's the question, but I need to assign it to a variable. I don't want to have to type that out every time I want to use that question. So I'm going to assign it to a variable as we've done in the past, like we did with connection. We assigned all that information, all the results from there. We shoved it into this storage spot, this connection variable. And we're going to do the same with our query. So I'm just going to call it division. Ooh, it's a little bit weird. Division query equals, now you see it hasn't got a different color, that's because I haven't included the $sign. There we go, so now it's a variable, and I need to put quote marks around that as well. Quote marks around that, and finish it off with a semicolon. Now that all that code, that SQL code that I got from PHP MyAdmin, has now been assigned or put into this little storage space division query, that variable. So now when I want to use this code, I can just type in division query. It's a lot easier to work with. Okay, so now that we've got our question built, we're going to ask the question of our database. So we're actually going to put the question to the database, and how we do that is we use something called the MySQL underscore query method, and you can see it's got a couple of parameters. So we want to pass it two things. First of all, it needs to know where it's going to ask the question, or who it's going to ask the question of. So we're going to pass it the connection, so con, and then we're going to pass it the, or give it as a parameter the actual question it's going to ask. So we've given it the person or the database it's going to ask, and the question we want it to ask as well. So I can just put in division query. Very useful way of using that that variable. Okay, so there we go. We've asked the question. Now the results for that question, like all the records that will be coming back from the database, that's going to come back as a result of asking this question and using MySQL query. So what we want to do is we want to store all those results somewhere. So again, we're going to create a new variable, new storage space, and I'm going to call it results. Okay, so when this MySQL query goes away, it uses that connection and it uses the query to actually go and get that information. It's got a place to store it when it gets back, and it's going to store it in this variable called results, and we'll be using that in order to display those results. So we're going to be using this variable in order to display those results in just a second. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our process. Now comes a little bit of a complicated concept. We're going to display those results. So we've got a big storage space with all of those results, all of these results stored in there. Okay, so we've got lots and lots of records stored in there. What we want to do is we want to cycle through those records. So I want to come in here, I want to get this record and then display it, and then I want to get to this record, display that, this record, display that, and we build up our website's table just by cycling through the records one by one by one by one. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. But it takes a little bit of doing. So first, what we're going to use to do this is something called a while loop. So I start off with while and then put in some brackets. Now, while works a similar way to a if statement, except it repeats itself. So if statement, which we used up here, said if this is true, I want you to do this instruction. While says if whilst this remains true, I want you to repeat these instructions. Okay, so while MySQL fetch array, whilst this is still getting results, whilst we still have records to be read, it's going to go through it one by one by one. While there is still another record to be extracted, I want you to repeat these instructions. Okay, so MySQL array, and we have to pass it the results variable, because that's where all that information is stored. So it's just going to cycle through those, and what it's going to do is it's going to store each of these records, each individual record, in a new variable called row. So row equals the extracted record. So it will go through and it will extract that record and it will store it in row, and then it will perform a series of instructions on that record, which is actually displaying it. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we're actually putting these results into our table. Now up here, we started our table off with just normal HTML. Yep, we put in the headings, we ended the row that the headings were on. So what we're going to do is we're starting to insert data. So I'm going to first of all echo the HTML symbol for a table row, because I want to start a new table row. So that's my first thing. Then I'm going to echo the symbol for table data. Okay, I'm going to start inserting data. You can indent this if you want as well. Okay, now we will remember from when we create a table, when we've got a TD or a TH, the thing that comes between those two tags is the data, or is the table header. So I've opened my table data and I've got to put in what I'm actually going to put as the data. So this is where I use my row. So I go, okay, dot, and then I go row, and then I go square brackets, and I'm looking for the field that I'm interested in. So it would be team name. You might want to check, sorry, this also needs to be in single quote marks. You might want to check just in your database that you're actually getting the name of the field right. So you can see here it's actually name, it's not team name like I thought it was. So I'll need to make sure that is correct. The table header can be team name, that's absolutely fine. I can even put a space in there and that's fine. But when I'm referring to the actual row, yeah, this is this information. It's come directly from the database and I need to make sure I refer to it correctly, otherwise it won't work. Okay, so from that row or that record, I want that information and I'm putting it in here, and then I want to finish off that table data. Okay, So that's how we extract from that variable row which holds the record. I can extract an individual piece of information from that record. So here we have a record, and I've extracted that individual piece names, the Minnesota Twins, from that record. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to get, I think the next one was the div ID, then the rank, and then the wins and losses. And I'm going to display those, and then I will move on to the next record and display that as well. Move on. And that's what that while loop is used for. Okay, so I'll just copy and paste this because no sense in repeating everything. Just make sure that's correct before you go copying and pasting it, because if there is an error in there, you'll just be making extra work for yourself. So we've got team ID. I think team ID. Again, you want to check that and just make sure that's correct in your database, because if you get it wrong, it won't display the information correctly. Then we had ranking, but it's actually called rank in the database. And wins, I think it's just called W, and losses, it's just called L. Let me just double check all that information. Okay, it turns out that rank has a capital, and it should be a capital W and a capital L. Otherwise, we're looking pretty good. Okay, so I have put in the data that I hope to extract from that record, and now what I want to do is echo, and I think you probably can guess what's going in here. It's going to be the finish to that table row, okay? Because the next time it cycles through the while loop, it's going to get the next record, and we want it to start on a new row, and then it will be inserting the new record's information. So it'll be going to that row variable and getting the next record that was in the list. And when it cycles through the last time and it says, okay, there's nothing in this anymore, there's no more information to extract, no more records, then it will error out of the, or jump out of the while loop, and we want it to finish off the table at this stage. So echo, what's going on there? I haven't finished off my, that'd be one. It's looking a bit wrong. Okay, so echo table, and sorry, it's a finishing tag. Echo table in quote mark semicolon. Now, it's really easy to leave a quote mark off, and you saw me do it. And it's also really easy to leave a semicolon off, and you saw me do that as well. So it's a really common error, and I would look out for it if your code is not working, or especially if there's strange coloring going on with your code. If the colors aren't as they should be, that's probably what's happening. So I would go back through your code and just check to make sure that everything has been included that needs to be included. But this should be ready to go. I just need to put in my password, and then I'm going to upload it onto my server, and we'll see how that's done in our next video.